On the debate tonight,
प्रधानमंत्री श्रम योगी मानधन योजना यानी पीएम सिम.
massive announcement for the unorganized sector. India's unorganized sector gets a new pension scheme, the Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandhan Yojana, assurance of 3,000 rupees per month post-retirement. The scheme that was announced in the budget was launched by the Prime Minister today. Prime Minister called it an inclusive pension scheme that will finally give the unorganized sector their due. The scheme is expected to benefit 42 crore people.
जो लोग इस योजना का लाभ उठाएंगे उन्हें 60 वर्ष की आयु के बाद 3,000 रुपये की नियमित मासिक पेंशन तय है.
As the pension scheme for the unorganized sector begins to roll out, the implementation of the scheme is being questioned.
ये बहुत ही अच्छी योजना है और असंगठित कामगार के लिए आज कुछ भी नहीं है. तो आज अगर ये एक कॉन्क्रीट बेस अगर 3,000 रुपये भी मिल गया तो वो फैमिली अपने अच्छे से दिन खाना पीना गुजार सकती है. अच्छा
में सरकार ने जो एक नई स्कीम लाई है वो सरासर गलत स्कीम है, लोगों को लुभाने की स्कीम है.
वो 3,000 मेरे को नहीं लगता कि ये 3,000 रुपये मेरे लिए काफ़ी रहेंगे.
Mirror now asks, is the new pension scheme for the unorganized sector truly inclusive? Will the benefits of the scheme actually reach the marginalized of the unorganized sector? Let's debate.
Well, it's called the PM SIM. It's a pension plan for the unorganized sector. Anyone between the ages of 18 and 40 can sign up now and contribute on a regular basis until retirement at the age of 60, where they will then receive an income of 3,000 rupees a month. There are so many questions. Without those questions, we have to ask ourselves if the government was perhaps in a bit of a hurry to launch this particular scheme before the elections. And if the government was not in a hurry, then you should have the answers to all the questions we're about to ask. Joining me on the show, Raman Malik for the BJP, Professor Arun Kumar, who's with the Institute of Social Sciences. We also have Santosh Mehrotra, Professor of Economics. Ratan Manilal is a senior journalist. Abhimanyu Kohar brings in the farmer point of view. Sumit Agarwal, national convener of the Social Media Committee for the All India Traders, who brings in the trader point of view. I welcome all of you to this conversation. Thank you for joining us. Professor Arun Kumar, my first question is to you. If you've taken a look at the specifics of this particular pension scheme, does it serve the purpose that it was intended to? My first question was simply this. If we had a government who until 3 weeks ago was telling us that they don't have a fix of how many unorganized workers there are in the country, that there isn't enough data, we haven't studied that sector, how are we going to implement a pension scheme for these workers?
So, Faye, you are right that implementation will be a problem, but conceptually it's a good thing. Unorganized sector needs support. But the problem is that the unorganized sector is suffering from huge unemployment because of demonetization and GST, and they needed some immediate relief. Now, the pension scheme will give you relief after 30 years or 40 years when you achieve the age of 60. So what happens now? That's point number one. Point number two is that the amount of money that will be given, 3,000 rupees, after 30 years would, if the rate of inflation is 5%, it would amount to 800 rupees per month. In today's prices, if the rate of inflation is 6%, it would amount to only 650 rupees per month. So that would be very inadequate. What the scheme should have done is it should have linked it to the rate of inflation. So the amount of contribution and the amount of money that the pensioner would receive should have been linked to inflation rather than just being this thing. Next point I'd like to make is that if even 10 crore people are to be covered under this within the first year, then the allocation should have been about 6,600 crores, but the allocation for it in the budget is only 600 crores. That means the government doesn't expect to cover more than 1 crore people to begin with. So the allocation is quite inadequate. The next point I'd like to make is that at this point, the amount of money that would be contributed to this pension scheme would actually come back to the government in the form of small savings. So government, in a sense, is giving with one hand and taking it back with the other hand for its budgetary purposes. So in other words, in India, There are several kinds of problems that a scheme like this would face: identifying the people, getting the names on, getting them to come on to the scheme, making adequate allocation. And finally, the big problem would be that as time goes by and the burden on the budget rises, the government may actually say dilute the scheme, may not get more people. And what about people who are between 40 and 60 at the moment, who will not be covered, and they are the ones who are in need of immediate relief? So in other words, this scheme, implementation wise and in terms of clarifying how the scheme would be working, in both terms, I think there's a problem with the scheme.
Both terms. I also want to ask this question of Santosh Mehrotra. Professor Mehrotra, I know you've had a look at the scheme as well. Are there any challenges you see in implementation right now?
Of course, plenty of challenges. One of the criteria for choosing those who can contribute to the scheme, because you have to register for it, and you have to prove that your income is less than 15,000 rupees per month. Now, in a highly informalized economy, people may be able to misstate what they are getting and register for it. How are you going to find out who's getting 15,000 and who's getting more than 15,000? Please remember, there is a contribution coming from the government. So, you know, there can be very easy gaming of the system whereby people say they might be earning 20,000 rupees a month, but they actually say we are earning 12,000 rupees a month, and thereby they register, and then the government also begins to contribute to it. So, you know, schemes like this never should be introduced on a nationwide scale. They should always be piloted. If we are serious, then without a pilot, you don't go to scale. In any case, you already had a Atal Pension Yojana. So all that this is attempting to do was, in the Atal Pension Yojana, you were going to get a minimum of 1,000 rupees. Now you're supposed to be getting a minimum of 3,000 rupees. You know, it's not entirely clear, laudable as the objective might be, as to, you know, how this is going to be implemented. And it is not as though previous governments have not implemented pension programs. There are 3 pension programs already in existence for several decades. One is for the old age in the elderly in the rural areas, and that's called the National Old Age Pension Scheme, wherein the government pays, the union government pays at least 200 rupees a month, and the state government pays an equivalent amount or even more. That's one. In addition, there is a pension scheme for widows. Thirdly, there is a pension scheme that is available for disabled people. So, you know, it's not as though we don't have experience of dealing with pensions. What would have been useful is if the scheme, these existing schemes, the Atal or the 3 that I have mentioned that have pre-existed, had been evaluated.
Yes.
How they are functioning, what are the problems with them, how can they be improved before you go to scale. And clearly, you know, allocating 500 crores for it just before the election clearly seems to suggest that this is intended to catch the voter and rename the Atal Pension Yojana into the Pradhan Mantri, you know, SIM.
Yes, I can see Raman Malik has his hand up. Mr. Malik, I have a question for you. The Prime Minister, when he announced this scheme, said that it will help 42 crore workers from the unorganized sector who are eligible for this pension. The last piece of data we had on the number of workers in the unorganized sector came from the NSSO survey, which the government has discredited as not reliable. Would you please tell us where this number, 42 crore unorganized workers, has been sourced from?
See, this primarily comes from 2 basic calculations which are there. One was the number of people which were there who were EPS, not BPL, but EPL. And secondly, the number of people that were there in the with the Aadhaar and with the other with the PDS data and how we, kind of calculated on that. But having said that aside, I want to set certain things correct here. Number one is, I have not seen something which is so negative across the domain which this debate has started. Rather than complimenting the Prime Minister that you have actually started looking after the social sector, the social reform, the social support that is required for a citizen, which we always aspired for, which was going down in the West in every place, we have started criticizing that, oh, this is this and this is that. I want to understand, at least something is happening. Something has started moving. Rather than being happy about something has started opening, walking through, something has started going onto the social security side, we are contradicting it. We are readily saying that, oh, this is a failure. Sir, please understand, there are number of schemes for the poor which have come in. Whether it is reducing the medical bill, by capping the medicines and other equipment, by Ayushman, by Atal Bima Pension Yojana, whether it was the two insurances of 12 rupees and 330
Mr. Raman
rupees,
Malik,
whether it is other schemes which have come in, these schemes are all there. Plus, this is on top of it. So please understand, we are collaborating and moving towards a complete social security platform for the underprivileged first. Then you can please come forward with other various demands that you want. Now, the most important factor which must be debated here is, what was the social security pre-2014 and what is post-2014? I think that is where India has moved, how much India has moved towards that. That should be the kind of debate that we should be happening so that we can assess.
Okay. Mr. Malik, that would be a debate you can have when you have your own television channel, but this is a debate topic that I have chosen. If I go back to the first thing you said
we will have, yes, don't worry.
Please do.
People will have, Faye D'Souza, people will have.
I'm glad.
Media cannot, social media is stronger than the media that you have. One day, you will understand the power of people when they start talking on their own.
People can talk. This is democracy. Everybody speaks on their own already, Mr. Malik. Now, here's my question. You started off by saying the calculations that the Prime Minister announced today of 42 crore unorganized workers came from EPL, Aadhaar and PDS.
Mr. Malik, you can have your own channel. If that is the case, why do you need people? Give your own sermons.
Mr. Malik.
Give your own sermons.
Mr. Malik, calm down. My question to you is this.
Have a peace channel like Mr. Nayak.
Are you quite done? Okay.
I am not done, Faye. I am totally disturbed by your statement, have your own channel. I am very sorry. That was not expected out of you.
Okay. My question to you is this. You started off saying the calculation. Like my question to you is this. You started off saying the calculation of 42 crore workers is from the EPL. If you would please elaborate what EPL is, Aadhaar and PDS. In that case, could you please tell us where this report is? And in that calculation, what is the level of unemployment in the country right now? If the government has calculated how many unorganized workers there are in the country, then do we have a calculation? We should also, along with that, have a calculation of the number of unemployed people in the country. Also, when you said EPL, what is EPL, Mr. Malik?
First of all, EPL is the data which is set by, or let's say the parameters which is set by the World Bank, which says 1.62 or $1.92 per day average earning, or people earning below that are extremely poor people or extremely under the poverty line. So that level, which was 248 million people in India in 2011, and now probably the next report which will come would be around 50 million odd people. But having said that, Now, if I tell you with the same arrogance that you showed, that you have your own channel, if I tell you the government knows how its business is and how to run its show, and you guys do not know, understand, how would you feel like? But I would not say that because I would not stoop down to that level. But let me tell you something, this government has actually worked for the poor. And that is what is disturbing to the people who have been earning their livelihood and name on the name
Mr.
of
Malik,
poor.
the World Bank's definition of below the poverty line doesn't specify workers.
The whole schemes which I mentioned.
The World Bank's specification of below the poverty line, which is BPL, doesn't specify whether they're workers or not workers, and that's not good enough data to go by. Also, if you're going to ask me how I feel, my emotions are not part of my job. This is a job that I have to do, Mr. Malik. It's tough on some days, but I have to question the government of the day. That's the nature of the job. Santosh Mehrotra spends his day...
does not permit your job.
Santosh Mehrotra spends the day dealing with data.
Does not permit you to hit below the belt. There is certain level
of decency
which is expected out of a senior journalist.
There are others.
Mr. Mehrotra, if you could just go by, my biggest problem here...
Faye is asking me a question. Sir, Mr. Raman Malik, sir.
Yes, yes. 1 second. One last question about the data and then we can move on to the actual scheme.
Yeah.
Professor Mehrotra, the data, Faye? Please. Go ahead.
Mr. Malik, may I, sir? May I, sir? Mr. Malik, there are other people on this panel.
Yes, Professor Mehrotra, go ahead, please.
First of all, the extreme poverty line of the World Bank, Faye, has nothing to do whatsoever with this, with the identification of those who are going to be chosen for this pension scheme. So there's no point in talking about the 50 million or whatever million that the World Bank decides is the... I mean, I think we have enough economists in this country who can tell us how many poor people there are. Besides, that's not the point here. The point I was making, which I think the question I would put to Mr. Malik and he should answer this question. How are you going to identify these people?
See the suffering of the poor.
Mr. Malik, please, I'm going to ask politely. One second. No, I'm going to intervene here. One second. Mr. Malik, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask Mr. Malik not to interrupt the panelists, and I'm going to also ask my audio engineer to start moderating the mics, please, so we can hear them speak one at a time. Professor Mehrotra, please continue.
Thank you. I was just making the point, Faye, that how are you going to identify these people? Mr. Malik should answer that question. Who are earning less than 15,000 rupees. You know, you cannot create a design of a system which is flawed from the very beginning. You don't know how much people earn in the informal sector because they're not filing an income tax return. It's next to impossible to determine how much people are earning. So how are you going to decide who's eligible for this and who's not eligible for this? Are you going to sort of ask the local MLA or the local municipal councillor to actually certify that they are earning less than 15,000 rupees? You know, this is not serious. The point is that there are many people who've thought about this, written about this. There is a large body of literature about how to ensure social security and pensions for the unorganized sector. This government, the Ministry of Labour had asked me to chair a task force to estimate the cost to the government of ensuring pensions and death and disability insurance for the poor in this country. I was in the process of doing that. But unfortunately, that work has been brought to a stop by the ministry for whatever reason, because there was some disagreement within the ministry. It is a good thing that the Ministry of Labour has come up with a code on social security which tries to ensure possibly social security for unorganized sector workers. But that went onto the website of the Ministry of Labour and it is now not available on the Ministry of Labour website because there was far too much disagreement between the trade unions. So, you know, announcing this scheme in the absence of any consensus within government itself seems to suggest that not serious thought has gone into this matter. You know, I was trying to help the government actually estimate the cost of social insurance for the poor unorganized sector workers, where you could identify the poor properly on the basis of the socio-economic and caste census, not on the basis of 15,000 rupees per month.
Well, let me just go through the eligibility. Absolutely. Let me go through the eligibility that has been put out by the Ministry of Labour. Under this scheme, the scheme is open to unorganized workers whose monthly income doesn't exceed 15,000 rupees. The applicant must have a savings bank account and an Aadhaar number and must be between the ages of 18 to 40. So this is how it works. If you're between the ages of 18 to 40, you begin contributing today after you sign on and you prove to the government that you work with the unorganized sector, which means you're not a regular salaried employee. You will then have to contribute a regular amount every month. The government will match your contribution. And when you reach the age of 60, is when you will actually begin a payout. Also, the payout will be 3,000 rupees a month at the age of 60. There's a different conversation that has to be had about the value of 3,000 rupees a month 20 years from today, given inflation. That might be a slightly more complicated value. But let me bring in the rest of my panelists. Sumit Agarwal is with the All India Traders Confederation. Sumit, you employ, and the traders employ, a lot of unorganized workers, people who load, people who drive. Will this be useful to them? This is, Raman Malik is right, social security is something we need in this country. This is something we've been waiting for and asking for a very long time. Will this solve the problem? Sumit Agarwal.
Without getting into the politics of the entire thing, Confederation of All India Traders largely welcomed this step by the government. And I think it is a brilliant step and a futuristic step in the right direction. We need to understand that a large part of the sector of the unorganized sector also is part of the retail trade, of the small traders. And we need to understand, our panelists have been saying about eligibility, they're talking about the implementation of the scheme. So we need to see that it has been made very clear that above 15,000 people, all the workers who are up to 15,000 will be covered. Also, you have missed out an important point which says that all those who are availing benefits of ESI, PF and NPS, they will not be covered under this.
Yes.
So it is not a very difficult thing to, identify the population which falls under this category. Yes, implementation could be an issue, but yes, I mean, we have to understand, we should start this debate on a positive note. It is a good step in the right direction by the government, looking at the social security of the unorganized workforce of the country. Now, implementation for all schemes can be difficult. It takes time for things to implement, but yes, we as traders bodies across India, we welcome this step because a lot of unorganized trade, a lot of small shops, they employ a lot of people who are falling in this category, below 15,000, and they do not even are registered under the Shops and Establishments Act. So what happens is that even the small traders, the workers who are working with small traders fall under this scheme. So we welcome this. It is a huge step in the right direction.
A huge step in the right direction from Sumit Agarwal. Same question also to Abhimanyu Kohar, National Coordinator of the Rashtriya Kisan Mahasangh. Abhimanyu ji, हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए बहुत धन्यवाद. क्या आप मानते हैं कि PM SIM जो पेंशन स्कीम लॉन्च किया गया, रमन मलिक जी ने अभी अभी कहा कि जो भी सैलरीड नहीं है तो हमारे जितने सारे किसान हैं इसके अंदर आ जाते हैं, क्या ये जो सुविधा है, डू यू थिंक इट विल हेल्प? क्या आप मानते हैं कि सारे किसानों को इसमें भर्ती होनी चाहिए?
देखिए, जो इस पॉलिसी के अंदर जो क्लॉजेज हैं उसमें कहा गया है कि जो 18 से 40 साल वाले अभी हैं जो किसान, जो लैंडलेस लेबर्स हैं, उनको एलिजिबल माना गया है और जब वो 60 साल के हो जाएंगे उसके बाद उनको पेंशन मिलेगी। यानी 20 साल तक तो अभी उन्हें कुछ नहीं मिलने वाला, जो आज 40 साल का है उसको भी 20 साल के बाद उसको मिलेगा। अभी हमें समझना चाहिए कि जो किसान आज के दिन जो आत्महत्या के कगार पे पहुंच चुका है, आज उसके लिए आपके पास क्या समाधान है? आप उसको कह रहे हैं कि हम 20 साल बाद जाके उसको ये इतनी पेंशन दे देंगे, तो 20 साल तक वो जिंदा रहेगा या नहीं रहेगा, ऐसी सिचुएशन ही नहीं है, वो आत्महत्या के कगार पे खड़ा है, तो उसके लिए आप क्या कर रहे हैं? सबसे बड़ा सवाल ये है। दूसरी बात यह है कि क्या गवर्नमेंट के पास क्रेडिबल डाटा है कि कितने लैंडलेस लेबर, लैंडलेस फार्मर हमारे पास हैं? अभी उसको कहीं भी डाटा कहीं भी दिखाई नहीं देता है। तीसरी बात है, ऐसी कोई भी जो स्कीम होती है जिसमें एक लैंडलेस लेबर को या लैंडलेस किसान को कंट्रीब्यूट करना होता है पहले, ऐसी स्कीम से किसान दूर रहते हैं। आप इससे पहले भी बहुत सारी ऐसी योजनाएं जो आई, अटल पेंशन योजना थी, उससे भी लगभग जो लैंडलेस किसान थे वो उससे दूर रहे हैं। तो ये हमें, अगर हम थोड़ा सा बैकग्राउंड में देखेंगे तो ये बात क्लियर कट नजर आती है। और एक जो इस सरकार के साथ सबसे बड़ी समस्या है मैम, वो ये है, अरे आप सुनिए एक बार, सुनिए एक बार, सबसे बड़ी इस गवर्नमेंट के साथ समस्या ये है कि ये गवर्नमेंट पॉलिसीज पे पॉलिसीज लॉन्च करती रहती है, लेकिन जो पहले वाली पॉलिसीज है उनका इंप्लीमेंटेशन कितना हुआ है उसका एनालिसिस बिल्कुल भी नहीं करते हैं। अटल पेंशन योजना का भी एनालिसिस क्या इन्होंने किया है, उसमें कितने लोग जुड़े हैं क्या इन्होंने देखा है? इन्होंने उस पॉलिसी का सिर्फ नाम चेंज कर दिया और एक दो उसमें चेंजेस कर दिए हैं, डिजाइन उसमें एज इट इज है। और जो अंतिम बात मैं कहना चाहूंगा, इस गवर्नमेंट की आदत है, इनका जो भी कार्यकाल है, जो उनका टेन्योर है वो 2019 तक है, लेकिन ये सपने पहले 10 साल बाद के दिखाते थे कि भाई हम 5 साल बाद जाके किसानों की आय दोगुनी कर देंगे, फिर 10 साल का ये अपनी स्कीम लेके आए, अब ये कह रहे हैं हम 20 साल बाद जाके ये कर देंगे। तो सबसे बड़ी समस्या इस गवर्नमेंट की ये है कि आपका टेन्योर 2019 तक था, 2019 तक आपने क्या किया किसानों के लिए ये तो आप बता दीजिए। आपके पास बताने के लिए कुछ है नहीं, इसलिए आप कह रहे हैं कि 20 साल बाद जाके हम ये कर देंगे, और 20 साल बाद जाके जब आप 3,000 रुपए देंगे तो उस समय जो इन्फ्लेशन बढ़ चुका होगा तो 3,000 रुपए में किसान के लिए क्या कर पाएंगे आप? ये सबसे बड़ा सवाल है।
Well, those are all fair questions. One last voice, Ratan Manilal. Ek minute. Ratan Manilal is a very senior journalist who joins us right now. Mr. Lal, when you've had a look at the scheme, do you see this? And it is true that we are a country that has been in desperate need of social security. But social security means that when someone works their whole life, they get a pension from the government, irrespective of whether or not they've signed on and they've contributed. Now, this is a voluntary scheme. It took a while for us to actually understand it in our own newsroom after tremendous research. How will we get, and this is the list, if I may just call it out, how will we get taxi drivers, bricklayers, rag pickers to actually come in and sign on and actually start contributing and to understand what they're signing on for? Where do you see the challenges in this scheme?
See, of course, the biggest problem is to identify the people who are eligible for this, and panelists have been admitting that the number of such people could be in millions all over the country, and to expect that they will, understand the nitty-gritty of the scheme and then sign on, and of course some paperwork will be required, and then at the end of it they will be required to contribute some small amount from their own side for some years. So in totality, I feel the idea may be good to provide at least a very basic kind of a social security system. But I think it will be very difficult for, first of all, to get people to enroll, and then to keep it running, all through the next, I think, 20 years or so. And then at the end of it, what benefit will the scheme have politically, or in improving the quality of life of such people? And what will they do with the with a very small amount of 3,000 rupees after 20 years or so? So all these things add up to not a very useful kind of a social security scheme. Because I understand that in UP also several schemes were being run by the previous governments, for people in the unorganized sector, for landless people, for widows, and so on. The problem everywhere used to be the identification of beneficiaries, the siphoning off of money, even from the banks, the role of the middlemen who used to bring out bring up these people to get signed, and so on. So I think the problems are many, but as an idea, I think it should be welcomed.
Absolutely. I just want to bring Professor Arun Kumar back in again to, if he wants to respond to any of the statements that have been made. The Atal Pension Yojana as of 2016.
I would like to put in something which is important in this discussion.
Yes, I'll come back to you, Mr. Malik.
I just want 10 seconds to put in something which is very important.
10 seconds, you promise? 10 seconds, all right, go ahead.
The whole point is we are forgetting the vision of the Prime Minister, which gave us JAM, Jandhan, Aadhaar and Mobile. The three things add up to a lot of data numbers. When it turns the big data working, you will have a lot of results. And the direct benefit, the Aadhaar linking and the mobile linking will verify that it will be a transparent movement and DBT would happen properly. So a lot of those things would be negated by that jam.
Okay, fair enough. Mr. Malik, I just want to point out that as per the Supreme Court order that came on Aadhaar, the Supreme Court has mandated that mobiles and Aadhaar are no longer to be linked, and mobile companies
there was a brigade which never wanted Aadhaar.
Allow me to finish,
because
please.
their whole business used to go.
No. The Supreme Court, Mr. Malik, the highest court of the land, mandated that mobile phones and Aadhaar are no longer to be linked, and the data that has been collected by mobile phones should mandated be destroyed within a few months of that Supreme Court hearing. We don't know whether the data has been destroyed, and even if you're telling us that Jandan Aadhaar and mobile will give us the data, then we must answer the question of what is the rate of unemployment in the country, because the government has until a few weeks ago been claiming that it has no data, and that is why we don't know what the unemployment numbers are in the country. Professor Kumar, please go ahead. Your comments.
Yeah, as I said, conceptually it's very good to have, some kind of protection for old age, for the people who are marginalized. There's no doubt about that. Lekin, as other panelists have said, how do you identify, even if you have a total number of, say, 450 million or 420 million identified on the basis of, say, poverty line or anything else that you can think of, how do you identify the individual? That becomes a problem. Having an aggregate number doesn't mean we can identify who are the right people. Second point, as I was saying, was to link it only to 15,000 rupees. That is another problem. Because as Santosh has said, how do you know whose income is what? The Aadhaar data doesn't tell you, the other data doesn't tell you, so therefore you will find it difficult. So I think what it should have been is that anybody who wants to register for some scheme like that, they should be allowed to register, because otherwise identification would become a very big problem. Similarly, the amount of money that should be paid at the end when people retire, that should be linked to inflation. So 3,000 today should be linked to something like 9,000 after 30 years at 5% inflation, or about 11,000, 12,000 if the rate of inflation is 6%. So something like that should have been done. Next point is that all those who are between 40 and 60 who are going to retire sooner than the younger people, what happens to them? They are the ones who are going to face a crisis in their life very soon. So I think the scheme should have been extended to everybody who is there today and who can contribute till whatever time, and then the rest of it should have come out of some kind of social security fund that should have been created. So in other words, there are many implementation problems, there are many conceptual problems, and that's why people are having doubts. And I think the government should answer that so that the scheme can be rolled out in a proper way. Otherwise, like has happened with many other schemes, you announce very good schemes, but then they don't get implemented because the roadmap is not very clear. And so in this case also, the roadmap is leading to a lot of questions, and those questions the government should answer.
Well, Mr. Malik, I have a couple of questions for you. One is the scheme's eligibility criteria says very clearly that one shouldn't have an income that exceeds 15,000 rupees. What documentation will I have to submit in order, if I'm an unorganized worker, a rag picker, a bricklayer, people who pull auto rickshaws or load vans, how do I prove my income? Because I'm getting paid by the hour or by the day. That's the first question. The second question is to address what Abhimanyu Kohar asked on behalf of the farmers he represents. How will this be helpful to the farmer if the farmer currently feels like they're not being looked after? So the first question is, what documentation will an individual have to submit in order to prove that their income is less than 15,000 rupees a month?
Okay, so first of all, let's understand a couple of things. It says that to take the benefit of this scheme, you must have what you should not have, the don'ts are there. We've already spoken about it. The do's are there, which says that you must have a bank account. The bank account for taking any subsidy needs an Aadhaar. At the same time, your bank transactions also would prove whether you are doing 15,000 plus or minus, whatever, to an extent, and I believe reasonably, it is known. Secondly, most of the people today, because of the movement of Jan Dhan Yojana, had massive number of accounts opened up in this tenure, which again, a lot of them were functional, a lot of them were not, but then they were mapped because they were opened up. third and foremost, the biggest thing, this is just an additional factor. This is not taking off the other things which has been done by this government. The problem is, if you start sitting down in your studios and accumulate just the schemes which a person could benefit of, then you will actually see the bigger picture. But the problem is, from the studio going on to the streets and from the streets to the farm, it is a long distance. Also, Abhinanyu, how he was saying things, I am also telling you, when we are giving you, when it is about the farm labor, we have to create an infrastructure where point by point everybody gets covered. Now you see, when it was Atal Pension Yojana, there was a minimum threshold. The threshold was for everybody, anybody, you, me, anybody who was below the age of 40 had to pay a particular amount to get a particular kind of pension. It was not this scheme. This scheme is only limited to those people who are economically dependent on the government to support them. And this is per person, it is not per family. So at the end of the day, you must understand the person who is there has to have some sense of security, because he gets a 5 lakh rupees annual for his health, which is covered. His medical costs have been reduced. Also, Ayushman, the medical shops which are Ayush shops which are being opened, they are giving you the generic medicine in such cheap thing, like let's say a 65 rupees medicine is coming at 15 rupees. That is the kind of reduction that has happened. The stents have come down, so that covers the medical. Now education, there are a lot of things which have started for the economically backward.
What have
there
you
are
started?
Improvements happening. I am not saying that the Prime Minister has a magic wand like Harry Potter and he's going to do everything in one go.
Okay.
But yes,
Raman Malik,
the poor believe that this man can deliver what they want.
Can we
and
play
whatever has not
footage
happened
that
in
Disha
55
collected
years
yesterday
would happen
because
now,
she was in the village
and Namulkin
yesterday.
Impossible is saying I am possible.
Okay, all right. Mr. Malik, let me just address what you said one by one. You began by saying that I'm very comfortable in my studio and I don't know what is going on in the country. I must remind you that I am part of a very large team of journalists who travel to the villages.
I never said that.
On a regular basis.
I
in
never
fact,
said
my
that,
colleague.
Please see the recording. I never said such words.
Mr. Malik, please don't interrupt me.
I never said such words.
Do not interrupt me.
I said it is a distance.
My
no,
colleague,
so you don't quote me wrong. You don't quote me wrong. You don't get that liberty to quote me wrong.
My colleague Disha Shah was in fact in rural Maharashtra yesterday and the day before that. She's in rural Maharashtra right now. She's currently tracking the scheme that the government has announced of the fact that they will transfer.
Only Maharashtra is not India, Faye.
Would you mind actually just not interrupting me so I do not have to moderate your audio, because I would like to be able to finish a sentence without an interruption, Mr. Malik. Disha Shah is currently checking to see if the 2,000 rupees that have been promised by the government have actually come to the bank accounts of the farmers. Some of the farmers actually say the money came in and then was reversed. We have reporters traveling across the country: Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Orissa, UP, Haryana. We've actually traveled across Tamil Nadu, across Andhra, across Telangana and across Karnataka, and we will soon have reporters traveling across West Bengal as well to check on the status of farmers across the country. To come back to what you said people need to submit their bank account and their Aadhaar, and through that the government will determine whether or not they're making less or more than 15,000 rupees a month. I'm really not sure why this particular policy or this particular plan still mandates a mobile, but it does mandate a mobile. It does not say how any individual is to certify that they are with the unorganized sector and that they are making less than 15,000 rupees. We also have to remember, when you work in the unorganized sector, you don't make the same amount of money every month. You get paid by the hour, sometimes by the day. Also, there are 30 lakh people as of 2016 that have signed on with the Atal Pension Yojana. There is no clarity on what happens to these people and if there's going to be any sort of harmonization of the two schemes. The difference between the Atal Pension Yojana and this particular plan is not much, other than the fact that the APY, the government's contribution, was limited to only 5 years. I want to take this back to Santosh Mehrotra. Santosh Mehrotra, can the government use a bank account and an Aadhaar to determine who qualifies and is eligible for this scheme or not?
No, of course not. Obviously not.
Why
All
not?
that the bank account and the Aadhaar does is the following. Let me explain. I'm about to explain. I've written about this subject publicly. All that the Aadhaar does is to identify biometrically that Faye D'Souza is Faye D'Souza and not Santosh Mehrotra. That's all that the Aadhaar does. Point one. As far as the bank account is concerned, it is a prerequisite for any cash transfer to be happening, and I think it's a wonderful thing that almost all households now have a bank account. So, in other words, the basis has been created through the Aadhaar plus the bank account for making any cash transfers and perhaps even doing a pension scheme. Let me come back to the identification issue because this goes to the heart of the matter. Let me begin by mentioning that someone who earns less than 15,000 rupees a month, even if he has a bank account, doesn't have cash left over to put it into the bank account. 15,000 rupees per month doesn't go very far. Most of these people are hand to mouth and are consuming what they earn on a regular basis, which is the reason why millions of accounts are dormant accounts. The new Jan Dhan accounts are dormant or they are zero balance accounts. So let's go back to if you're serious about identifying the poor, unorganized workers who you want to benefit through a pension program, then you would probably rely upon something that was conducted over 2011 to 2013 by the previous government called the Socio-Economic and Caste Census. In other words, you will use one or several of the 7 deprivations which are identified by the SECC, the Socio-Economic and Caste Census, which was done as a census across the whole country, including the rural as well as the urban areas. In other words, if you were to decide, if the government was to decide that someone with at least 3 of the 7 deprivations is going to be eligible for this pension, and therefore we will make them register. But you see what is good about these deprivations, the 7 deprivations that are in the Socio-Economic and Caste Census, is that they are observable characteristics, identifiable characteristics. For instance, is the household headed by a woman, or is it headed by a child? Is the household an SC household? Is it an ST household? I could go on. The point is that these are directly observable or verifiable characteristics which were ensured in a design for the SECC that I was part of in the NC Saxena committee report.
Yes.
So, I would request you to sort of hear me out on this. I have some experience of working on this subject for about 8 or 10 years. So, if you were to go that route of identification, then you would be being serious. If you go for a route of, who has 15,000 rupees income per month or less, then you are not serious, honestly, because you will have so many misidentified individuals that all the problems that existed with identifying the so-called poor will be repeated here. Between the year 2002 and 2011, until the SECC came into existence, you had massive exclusion errors and inclusion errors. So, let's think about this seriously. We are all in favor of a social security and pension program for the unorganized.
Professor Malhotra, we're running out of time. I just have a quick question to bring in, and this one I'll take to Professor Kumar.
Has the government said that it would not be utilizing the data which is available?
No, one second. I have a quick question for Professor Kumar. Professor Kumar, Mr. Raman Malik mentioned the poverty line. Now, as per the latest report, which came out a couple of years ago, the poverty line has now been moved to 32 rupees a day in rural India. 32 rupees a day is 960 rupees at the end of the month. 960 rupees is not going to wind up in a bank account. So, do you agree with Professor Malhotra that the bank account method might be a difficult method to actually, you have to have a bank account, an Aadhaar and a mobile. Would that be a difficult way to actually find these people and make and benefit them?
So you are absolutely right. Bank account does not tell you what is your income. The JAM scheme does not tell you what is the income. And therefore, identifying who has less than 15,000 rupees cannot be done on the basis of all these things. A point I'd like to make is that there may be many schemes, as Mr. Malik says, which benefit the poor, but today we are discussing whether this scheme will benefit the unorganized sector. And that is the problem that we are focusing on. Other schemes may benefit, there's no doubt about it, but there also the question of implementation comes in. So here also, the problem that Mr. Santosh Malhotra and myself we are pointing out is, how do you identify and how do you get the money to such people? Getting the money may be a simpler task, but identification will be a problem. And that's why I'm saying, do not have a limit of 15,000 rupees. Let either the SECC be used or let it be open to anybody who wants to enroll. Then it becomes simpler. So it becomes more universal. And therefore, the identification problem gets solved. So either you do this or that. Secondly, you must inflation index it if you want to be serious about giving support, and also include people between the age of 40 and 60 in some such scheme.
Right. Unfortunately, I've run out of time here, and I just want to echo what the panelists have said, which is the idea of social security and pension to a large portion of unorganized workers in India is important. One of the problems that the farmers are facing at this point is a lack of pension. So they're in their 60s, their 70s, sometimes in their late 70s, and still having to go out into the field and work because they don't have any other choice. They don't have a pension. India is perhaps a country that burdens its elderly with work because we haven't up until now, since independence, found a way to provide them with pensions. You'll see a lot of the laborers, you'll see taxi drivers, auto drivers working well into their 70s because we haven't as a country been able to provide pensions. This particular scheme, unfortunately, seems like it is being launched in haste. There are several questions to be answered, especially in comparison to the previous schemes that did exist. Having said that, it is a welcome step, but it is a welcome step that should also welcome questions and provide answers, because that is the best way to reach an ideal situation. We're going to keep a close eye on all of the schemes that will be announced in the run-up to the elections to check how many of them are being announced for implementation and out of seriousness, and how many of them are being announced just for votes. Thanks for watching.